Welcome back, everybody. I hope you've replenished yourselves with oxygen in the break. Hopefully there'll be enough in this room to sustain us through the rest of the session this afternoon. But I'm absolutely delighted that we have the opportunity now, or I have the opportunity now, to have a conversation with Lucy Powell MP, Shadow Secretary of State for DCMS within the Labour team. And really the person sort of doing all the thinking around kind of what a Labour government's approach would be to digital, to tech, the digital economy, to the digitisation of the economy, and it's a pretty full agenda that you have to look at. Just to kind of kick off, really. We started the day, we've launched our tech plan document, and when I was talking about it this morning, the thing I was really trying to stress was that this message around kind of purpose. And we often feel that too often sort of tech is sort of seen through the lens of sort of self-driving cars and shiny tech startups and venture capitalists and so on, and not seen as something that actually underpins the whole of the rest of the economy, and in particular the everyday economy, which is something that you talk about a lot. So how, as you're thinking about, coming to power and what you want to achieve in terms of the country, to what extent is tech sort of underpinning your thinking about how you deliver on your ambitions for the country?
Yeah, well, quite a lot in that. But yes, no, good question. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it is about how we use technology for the common good and for societal and economic good, and make sure that the technological disruption that we're undergoing, another technological disruption that we're undergoing now, works for the many and not just for the few. And that really is very much the kind of Labour values coming into play in this conversation. We've been working for a while now on a what I'm calling a green paper. It's not really a green paper, but a policy sort of document, which you're absolutely right, sort of always starts life as the digital economy, and then always ends up as the whole economy and the whole of society, and how we're going to deliver our big missions. Some of you will have heard Keir Starmer talk about a mission-driven government, and the technology and the digital piece that we're working on is about delivering across all of those five missions, using digital and new technology to do that, whether that's health care, whether that's growing the economy, whether that's skills and education and opportunity. It's across that whole piece. So yeah, it's one of the core principles that will underline what the next Labour government will do, and how we're going to do that.
And so you might have noticed, because we shared the tech plan document with you,
yes, which
you,
is
and
excellent.
You and the team. Well, you might have noticed that we sort of slightly constructed it in a missions-like way.
Absolutely.
But I mean, what were your thoughts on the document, and are there any sort of specific aspects of it that you thought were particularly interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an excellent document, and your team, Tech UK, you've been extremely helpful to us in developing some of our own ideas and thoughts in this space as well. So I think the way in which you've sort of structured that document, is really helpful as well. So just for example, one of the policies on reform of the apprenticeship levy, because I think to your earlier point, you're absolutely right. We're pretty good in this country at the advancements, at the scientific research, at the new technologies, at the scientific cutting edge of things. And we also have a population and a consumer base that are quite tech savvy as well. But one of the challenges that we have is this sort of long tail of poor diffusion of technology across the economy and across where we need it to be, public services and so on. So it's about looking at some of those challenges. So I think your thoughts around skills, we very strongly concur with. We've already got a policy proposal to reform the apprenticeship levy to become a growth and skills levy, with 50% of the current apprenticeship levy being able to be spent on other aspects of a business, or on short-term contracts, or to support small startup businesses, for example, which it currently is quite a challenge to do. We've had a big review on startups led by Lord Jim O'Neill, which has made a number of recommendations which concur very strongly with those in your tech plan as well. So I think there are a number of areas where we're already quite aligned, and we'll look to develop some of those further.
And I'm interested in, and maybe it's a thing we can kind of come back to. I'm also interested in the elements of perhaps the existing government's policy that you might continue with. So, for example, the lifelong loan entitlement and so on. Is that a mechanism that you think is likely to be fit for purpose that you would like to maintain, or would you sort of want to take a different approach to that fundamental question, which is, okay, how do people have the economic resources to retrain?
Well, absolutely. And, we always talk about young people, but most of the new jobs of the future, especially as AI and robotics and other things sort of come into the workplace and the nature of work changes, most of those new jobs of the future won't actually be being done by young people today. They'll be being done by today's current workforce. And so there is a huge change going on. And again, I think this is where I feel quite strongly when you look at the previous industrial and technological disruptions that have happened in the economy, we don't plan for that appropriately. We don't think about who's going to see the disbenefits of that most strongly. So if you look at the deindustrialised era of the sort of 70s and 80s, my part of the world in the north bore the brunt of that deindustrialisation, and whole communities, whole types of jobs, whole industries were mothballed or scrapped or left on the scrap heap during that process. And I do feel quite strongly that is where you need labour values of interventionism, of activism, of ensuring that people have the skills and opportunities to then thrive in the new opportunities of the future, rather than that just all being to the benefit of a small few, some of the big tech giants or different parts of the country, different communities and things. So a lifelong learning agenda and training and reskilling is absolutely central to that. And we'll, so I think some of the government schemes have been more successful than others, but we really want to foster a kind of partnership with business approach to that as well. It shouldn't just be left to the state to do that, but having the right incentives in place for businesses to invest in the right places, in the right people, in the right technologies of the future. I think there's a whole range of things we can look at there to ensure that businesses are, and the private sector are operating towards those common good ambitions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that, well, we certainly agree with that. And in particular, I mean, I think the big challenge that people face is in this transition. If you're making a really big investment in, retraining, taking time off, the costs associated with that, the costs of the retraining itself, and so on. It's a huge bet that people have to make on their future career. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how do we sort of de-risk that for people? How do we explain that the potential pathways, the potential jobs, the potential opportunities in a way that people can make that progression in a more kind of confident way. But it's absolutely one where I think government and businesses really need to work together. And I think actually there's a huge willingness to work together on that one.
No, definitely. And I think it takes leadership, and it doesn't just need to come from government, but it could come from places as well. I mean, Andy Burnham's doing some good work, for example, in my part of the world around this in terms of his new approach to post-16 skills and some opportunities there in the digital tech sector that's booming in Greater Manchester, for example. But yeah, I mean, look, that's the challenge that I've got teenage kids. I've got a 19-year-old boy who's, well, I say boy, man, who's very good at maths. I mean, you tell me what does he need to do to get a job in this industry? And I don't know that that's clearly understood for me as a parent, or for careers advisors in schools, for teachers, or maybe even so much sort of outside the sort of core tech sector itself. And I think understanding what skills and attributes we need to develop is really important. But it's also important, I think, for consumers and citizens in order to be able to navigate this whole area in terms of disinformation, misinformation, how their data is used or not used, having confidence in a lot of these systems, being able to access services and the economy as well. So, this is a whole kind of country mission, I think.
Yeah, and I think the often the term digital skills, you actually have a sort of 3 or 4 or 5 different skills challenges all wrapped up in that one term, and I think it's sometimes be more helpful if we kind of unpacked that a little bit in terms of what it means for different kind of cohorts in society, because the challenges and the solutions are probably very different actually in terms of that we need to work on.
Definitely.
I wanted to come to another issue which is really about how we make sure that we have an inclusive digital society, which is kind of connectivity.
Yeah.
And I mean, as somebody who 20 years ago was working on broadband policy, I think it's amazing the level of connectivity that we've achieved in terms of both the speed of the services and their reach across the country. But of course, it's not job done either in terms of there are still gaps in terms of reach, but then there's also challenges around social groups for whom the costs are potentially prohibitive. What are your views on how we complete the job, as it were, in terms of the reach, but also the inclusiveness?
Well, absolutely. I mean, look, obviously on the reach, I think we have made great progress in the last few years, but there's still more to be done there. And I think the government subsidies to get to some of those hard to reach places are moving too slowly. I think there are also some issues around competition in the long term and how that's actually going to play out. But you're absolutely right, I think, to highlight that it's all good having the fibres in the ground and the cables in the ground, but if people can't afford to connect to it, don't understand why they need to connect to it, or have the skills and the know-how to connect to it, then that opportunity is going to go unmet. And so affordability is critical to that, as is having the devices and understanding the need, I think. So there's a big education piece, as we were just getting back to there. I mean, again, a piece of work that Andy Burnham is doing in Greater Manchester with Talk, trying to reach those that are qualify for the social tariff. So using the data that the Combined Authority has around eligibility, working with Talk, what they found there is 88% of those eligible for the social tariff say they wouldn't go on it anyway, because that in itself is still too expensive. It's a monthly cost, it's not a pay-as-you-go cost. They perhaps don't have the devices, they perhaps don't understand why they might need to pay an extra £10-15 a month for something they can already do on smartphones and things. So these are the next waves of this. So we've been looking at how we can make social tariffs more available, cheaper and better advertised and better targeted, but also looking at how we can keep prices low generally. But also we do need to look at these other issues about accessibility and education, and we'll be saying a bit more on that in the coming months.
Do you think that, again, there's a lot to unpack there, isn't it? Because actually what we find is again, different kind of cohorts and groups in society have different issues and maybe barriers to engaging. Do you think there might be a case for having sort of more differentiated tariffs, for example, where for certain groups it might be a relatively small targeted group, but you have a very, very low tariff, in a way that tries to address particular needs, or do you think it's better to have a sort of a blanket approach that's kind of easy to communicate and easy to understand?
I mean, possibly a bit of both. I think I think we need a bit more flexibility, and we need to look at what's on offer for people as well. Because if also it's going to be so slow what's on offer, then maybe people are better off using their mobile data for the things that they're looking at using it for. So I think there's a whole sort of piece of work to be done there. But I think doing some of that on a place-based rather than just trying to think what's the national government sort of lever. I don't think there is such a thing. We've got to create the right environment and allow places to be looking at that themselves.
That's very interesting. I want to sort of turn to the issue of the day, obviously being AI and some of the slightly apocalyptic warnings that we kind of woke up to this morning. But
as it every morning.
Yeah, well, yeah, it has been a little bit like that recently.
Yeah.
But obviously AI is one issue and one kind of regulatory question amongst many regulatory questions at the moment. And actually, we had a really interesting panel earlier where we had all four of the major kind of regulators here together, kind of talking about, in a way, the way they've tried to work together and coordinate together. do you, but there's a real sense, I think, that our regulators are becoming really quite significant kind of economic actors in a way, because as you were saying right at the beginning, the digital economy is becoming the whole economy, and therefore the decisions that the regulators can take can have quite profound impacts for what happens across that economy. Is your sense that do you think the regulators have got a kind of clear enough direction from government, and if you were coming into power, would you be sort of seeking to give them a better or a clearer steer about, in a way, the outcome, that you want them to achieve? I'm just kind of interested in your thinking around the regulation.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I think we do need more clarity in the regulatory regime, and I always like to cause a bit of controversy before I arrive at these conferences, get a few more bums on seats. But we could perhaps talk about that in a minute. But I think the government's white paper, I mean, we're all waiting for that for ages and ages and ages. And then kind of what came was a bit of a damp squib, really, and was almost out of date before the ink was dry. We don't say ink was dry, it's not in the digital age, do we? I don't know what the digital version of that metaphor is. And I think there was really a big missed opportunity there in terms of, rather than just giving kind of disparate powers and opportunity, well, there wasn't even powers, but disparate kind of functions to a whole plethora of regulators to really properly coordinate that more centrally and provide more leadership, more advice. We've got all of the different regulators, some of which are more advanced than others, all scrambling to recruit the same people, to build up data analytics teams, AI teams, and everything else, without really a clearer direction of travel about where that could go, where that should go, how they could work together better, and with some overarching, I think, regulatory regime that everybody needs to work to. So I think, and also I think we kind of missed the point really on some of the issues that the apocalyptic kind of predictions are now talking to, which was really pointing more at applications of AI rather than some of the foundational models on which it's built, which I think is the more urgent matter now, really, in terms of how do we put the guardrails around that when even those that have developed them say they don't know how they work or how they might be used in the future, and are really worried about some of the risks involved in these huge machines that they've created. So I think it was kind of out of date before it was even written, and now we've got the Prime Minister running to catch up and rushing off to Washington to try and do that.
So in the Guardian article this morning, it was kind of reported as both you saying that that there may be aspects of AI that need kind of more specific regulation, and sort of whether it's kind of the foundational models or maybe aspects of AI that could lead to general AI, the sort of general intelligence. And you also talked about kind of the potential role that licensing could play, both in terms of licensed technologies, but also potentially even licensing of individuals to work on those technologies.
I didn't say that.
Oh, okay, well, that's interesting. But in that case, were you thinking there very much around the most kind of core and perhaps most kind of high risk elements of AI, or were you thinking about it more broadly?
I was thinking, obviously it's not quite how I would have written it, but that's absolutely fine. I'm sure we can all look at some of the headlines around these topics, have our own views about that. But look, I think there are times in history when we've had to look at new technologies and think, how are we going to ensure that if it gets into the wrong hands or is used in the wrong way, it can't cause a lot of devastation and problems in different ways, whether that's disinformation, whether that's sort of locking all of our systems overnight, or whatever it might be. So I think other examples of that have been in terms of the development of nuclear power, nuclear weaponry, whether that's in terms of drug and medicine development and other areas. We've done this in the past, and I think those kind of models, which mean that you have to have a license for what you have developed, But I think looking more specifically at some of the foundational large models there, but I do understand the concerns that people would have that somehow that would then block out new players from the system and would lead to a further aggregation of big tech monopolies, which is something, you know, I would be very much trying to guard against. And I think quite the opposite in a way is that I think if we get there a bit earlier than we are doing in understanding what that regulatory regime can look like and putting in place some of the processes and institutions to oversee that, you know, more quickly than we are doing at the moment, I think that can serve as an incentive for those who want to innovate and small businesses to come to this country or who are already in this country, because they've got more certainty around that and they understand the pathways in and out of that. And I think there are ways to mitigate that by sort of sharing and pooling and working together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck in many ways. We obviously had Brad Smith here earlier on from Microsoft, and he was talking about how they were viewing some of these issues. And I think, I mean, it's quite interesting. You know, first thing he was saying, you know, first of all, these are issues that they've been looking at for a long time. Yeah. You know, he said they've been looking at them for 6 years, and indeed, actually, Tech UK, we've been working on these kind of issues for about 6 years as well. So, but then also, you know, he was also saying that, you know, there were probably, I mean, he talked about almost the technology stack and the different parts of the technology stack, whether it's the applications or the foundation models, or indeed the data centers that underpin, you know, this AI. You know, we need to think perhaps maybe how we govern or regulate those in different ways, so this regulatory landscape could be quite variable on a risk-based basis in terms of looking at the most you know, high-risk areas. I wanted to come back though to your point about kind of as you said, you know, lots of people feel like they're being kind of misquoted by the media today, actually on this issue. Yeah. And clearly this is an issue that the media finds incredibly sort of fascinating, and it makes for wonderful copy in terms of, you know, talking about these kind of very sci-fi kind of related risks, and risks that I must say that, you know, that I don't think anybody totally discounts. By the way, you know, there's a lot of, we would say a lot of these are very, very hypothetical, but they aren't things that you would automatically discount. But I wanted to come back to this kind of question about language and narrative, because at the same time, you know, I'm quite sure you want to see the UK make the best possible use of AI.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, we've got to keep the public on board. And as we enter into a kind of political debate around the regulation of AI, how do we do it in a way that makes sure that ensures that the public don't just lose faith in either our ability to do the right thing or our ability to work together to do the right thing? How do we keep them on board and not either scare them to the point where they reject these technologies, or to the point where they kind of give up and switch off because it just sounds so awful that they can't deal with it?
Yeah, well, I mean, these are the big challenges, aren't they? And I think to your sort of earlier point about different levels of regulation, you know, another example of that, which I think leads to your other point, is we've got the data bill going through Parliament at the moment as well. Another massive missed opportunity. That's why it does sort of stick in the throat a little bit to sort of see the government trying to claim the mantle of leadership on these issues. You know, the data bill was a real opportunity for us to be world leading in terms of confidence in data, looking at how we can use data for the public good, more how we can build confidence in consumers, in citizens, in service users around their data, and what is the purpose, getting back to your theme of today, what is the public and societal purpose of data, and who should always hold the power. It's the new power base in this country, and so that's been a real missed opportunity. And we saw that during COVID, when there was a great sort of frenzy and desire and need for everyone to share their data, download the NHS app, tell us all your symptoms all the time, fill in surveys. You know, there was a huge appetite to do that. And then when people see their data being misused or are worried about how their data is then being used, people retreat from that quite quickly, and we do have to guard against that. And obviously, maybe sometimes the media is or isn't helpful in that. But I think, you know, leadership is really important. Making sure that underpinning these narratives are safety nets, are security, you know, is confidence. People understand the purpose. I think where people can see there is a purpose to sharing their data, that's not just for themselves but for a wider use, then they're keener to do that. But if they think it's just because they're going to get more targeted ads on Facebook, then they're less likely to do it. So, you know, these are some of the big questions we've got to really sort of think about, and taking the public with us is a massively important part of that. But also workers as well, and you know, we might see this next general election coming up. This potentially the first big election where algorithms, data, AI are kind of at the fore of an election, and we haven't really got a clue about that at the moment, have we? The impacts of that.
Is that something that worries you? I mean, as a politician, and as you think about, are you worried about going into the election and the way in which disinformation may play a role?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we've just spent, I mean, you know, another piece of legislation, we've just spent many years, but certainly many months and many hours looking at the online safety bill, which again, at the last minute, was watered down, was sort of backpedaled on in terms of its scope and remit, which then ducked some of these issues as well. So, you know, as parents, as people, as workers, you know, we all do worry about these issues, whether it's the safety of our children online, whether it's, you know, what's discerning between disinformation, misinformation, fact from reality, you know, how public agendas are being set or otherwise, and you know, these are all the sort of big issues that we've got to look at. But we can't be scared of regulation. We can't be scared of setting the rules of the game, and we can't believe, as I do believe, just to be party political for a moment, that the conservative narrative and ideology is, which is a more laissez-faire, let the markets sort of decide, and that will kind of work its way through. You know, we believe much more strongly in an active interventionist approach to these issues to ensure that the benefits are fairly shared and the disbenefits don't cause damage to individuals or society or the economy.
Yeah, I think, you know, one thing about the online safety bill is, in a way, I can't help but think it's kind of a model of how not to regulate on AI. I mean, I think if we, you know, because it seems to me we just don't have 5 years to spend talking
we definitely don't, no.
about how we regulate for AI. And one of the things that struck me about the online safety bill right from the instant was perhaps it was almost kind of too ambitious at the beginning, and maybe if we'd regulated in a more of a kind of iterative way with a series of small steps, you know, we might have made quicker progress than by trying to have this sort of all singing, all dancing piece of legislation that, in the end of the day, I don't think met the hopes and expectations of those who've been very invested in it. So.
Well, I think, look, it definitely fell foul of internal Conservative Party sort of political woes on free speech versus regulation. That definitely caused part of the delay. We've had a lot of political turmoil over the last few years. That's definitely caused a lot of the delay. But I think if we'd stuck with the early principles of duty of care and looking at the systems and the business models, rather than trying to look at individual pieces of content or how they may or may not proliferate online, but looking at how things do proliferate and the business models and so on. If we'd stuck to those original principles of a bill, and that's really what I'm calling for in relation to AI, rather than spending ages thinking about all the different applications, how they may or may not apply, and trying to sort of legislate around that. The foundation models on which the worrying aspects of AI, potential worrying aspects of AI, are built upon, that require a lot of investment, a lot of money, a lot of other people's work, a lot of other people's data and creativity. You know, let's think about those now early on and how we can put guardrails around that. And I think you're right. Let's learn the lessons of the online safety bill, which just couldn't decide
Yeah, I mean,
what it was or what it wasn't, and it shouldn't have ever been seen as a some kind of enemy of free speech. We can all say we should all be allowed to say what we want online. It's just can I go viral with my, misogynistic Andrew Tate views because they're so controversial and therefore the algorithms promote them more and more and more with more and more people seeing them, or can I just sort of shout into a vacuum about my misogynistic views potentially?
Just find out, I mean, on the AI point, I mean, obviously the EU has moved ahead, or is moving ahead with its AI Act. I mean, do you think there's a potential for sort of the UK to have a bit of a second mover advantage in that it actually gives us an opportunity to look at what they've done, learn from maybe the things that they got right, but also maybe learn from the things that they got wrong? And do you think is that something that your team will be looking at in terms of trying to get a sense of what do we think worked, what didn't work in terms of the European approach?
Well, I think we should seek to get our first mover advantage here, because yes, they've started that process. That might take some while to get everybody to sort of agree to that. I think the UK is really well placed to lead this debate. We've got a lot of the technology capabilities here. We've got a lot of the scientific research, the academic research. We're well known around the world for our regulatory approach, and it's well regarded. We've got the English language, which many of the models are built upon. We've got a huge amount of advantages, and actually sitting outside the EU bloc and the US bloc, which will probably both take different and possibly diverging views to regulation, a bit like we did in terms of COVID vaccine development, for example. I think we have an opportunity to be a bit more nimble, a bit more lighter foot, a bit more ahead of the game. And it's an opportunity I'm not sure the government is really seizing at the moment, maybe very latterly with a visit to Washington this week. But we really have to be talking that talk at home. And, when you look at the data bill, you look at the online safety bill, you look at an AI strategy that's already out of date before the ink could dry, give me a better metaphor. We've not really got that credibility to play that world leading role that I think we should be playing.
Yeah. I'm conscious we've almost run out of time, but I've just got one more question which I wanted to come back to the big picture politics bit, because obviously the Labour Party is doing extremely well in the polls at the moment. You're very, very clearly focusing on preparing for a general election that you believe that you can win, and preparing for government. In terms of the sort of the big picture sort of political objectives that you would hope to achieve in government, what are the big things that you look at, whether it's, I don't know, the NHS or whatever it is, where you think technology could play a big role in meeting your big picture political ambitions? What are the things where you think tech has to help us deliver what we need to deliver?
Well, I think tech is going to be critical to all of those ambitions. I mean, we've got these 5 missions around growing the economy, absolutely critical. As you were saying at the beginning, the everyday economy, the diffusion of tech through the economy, is a big part of our productivity problem in this country. We've still got a big productivity gap compared to most of our economic competitors, and utilising and using technology to its optimum throughout the economy, not just at the vanguard in the tech sector itself, which is amongst the best in the world, but throughout the economy is absolutely critical to us achieving that sustained growth that we want to achieve in all parts of the country as well, not just in London and the South East. That's going to be critical to that. In health, delivering our missions in terms of waiting times and healthcare provision, absolutely vital to achieving those productivity and efficiency gains and better outcomes and better patient services there, whether that's AI in diagnostics or whether that's data sharing and all of the other digital aspects of the NHS that we could be doing. Education, dealing with crime, obviously cyber. We've not even talked about cybercrime and online safety and everything. This is a big theme for Labour, running right through delivering on our missions. But we're definitely not thinking that we've won the next election, by the way. It's going to be a very, very difficult election for us, but we'll hopefully...
Well, in terms of talking about, using technology with purpose, I think that's a fantastic list of ambitions and certainly something we would wholeheartedly agree with. I'm conscious we have now run out of time. Lucy Powell, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today. Thank you for your...
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're now going to move on to what is, I think, our final panel of the day. We have Christina Criddle from the Financial Times, who's going to chair this final session on building the UK's digital economy.